A brutal arrest in the dead of night. Two arrogant cops thought they were throwing just another helpless man into a cold concrete cell. They mocked him, stripped his dignity, and locked the door. They had absolutely no idea they had just handcuffed their own precinct's worst nightmare. The rain over the city of Belmont was unrelenting, coming down in sheets that turned the asphalt of Harrison Boulevard into a slick black mirror. Darius Harlan pulled the hood of his faded gray sweatshirt tighter around his head, keeping his head down against the biting wind. He had just finished a grueling workout at a 24-hour boxing gym 3 blocks away. Darius was built like a heavyweight, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, and possessing a quiet, heavy stillness. But tonight, he was just a tired man walking home in the rain, carrying a worn duffel bag over one shoulder. He didn't notice the patrol cruiser until its high beams washed over him, casting his long, distorted shadow against the brick wall of a closed laundromat. The cruiser slowed to a crawl, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. Darius kept walking, maintaining his steady, rhythmic pace. He knew the unwritten rules of the street, especially in this district. You don't run, you don't stop abruptly, and you don't put your hands in your pockets. A quick chirp of the police siren cut through the sound of the rain. The cruiser's passenger window rolled down. "Hey, stop walking!" A sharp nasal voice barked from the darkness of the car. Darius stopped. He turned slowly, letting his duffel bag slide down to his side. He kept his hands completely visible, resting them on the strap of the bag. The cruiser's doors popped open, and two officers stepped out into the downpour. Officer Blake Hensley was a young, wiry man with a tight buzz cut and a restless, aggressive energy. His partner, Officer Reed Callahan, was older, heavier, and looked thoroughly annoyed to be standing in the rain. "Where are you headed tonight?" Hensley demanded, shining a blinding high-lumen maglite directly into Darius's eyes. "Home," Darius replied calmly, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. He didn't squint or turn away from the harsh light. "Home where?" Hensley took a step closer, resting his right hand casually on the butt of his service weapon, a deliberate, practiced intimidation tactic. "About 4 blocks from here, over on Cedar," Darius answered. "Put the bag on the ground," Callahan ordered, walking around the rear of the cruiser to flank him. "What's in it?" "Gym clothes, a towel, boxing gloves," Darius said, slowly lowering the bag to the wet sidewalk. "Officers, if I may ask, why am I being stopped?" Hensley scoffed, stepping into Darius's personal space. The cop smelled of stale coffee, cheap cologne, and adrenaline. "You match the description of a suspect involved in a string of burglaries in this sector. Tall, dark clothing, carrying a bag. Now put your hands on the wall." Darius didn't move immediately. His mind processed the tactical situation, the legal framework, and the blatant violation of protocol happening in real time. "Officer, a general description of dark clothing in the middle of a rainstorm does not constitute reasonable, articulable suspicion for a Terry stop, let alone a search. Am I being detained?" Hensley's jaw clenched. The arrogance in the cop's eyes flared into sudden, violent anger. Cops like Hensley weren't used to citizens on Harrison Boulevard using terms like reasonable, articulable suspicion. To them, it wasn't a legal defense. It was a challenge to their authority. "Oh, we got a street lawyer here, Reed," Hensley sneered. "I said put your hands on the damn wall." Without waiting for a response, Hensley lunged forward, shoving Darius hard in the chest. Darius's heavy boots remained planted. He barely moved backward, which only infuriated Hensley further. Callahan rushed in, grabbing Darius's left arm and twisting it violently behind his back. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Callahan yelled, though Darius hadn't flexed a single muscle in defiance. "I am not resisting," Darius said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the agonizing pressure on his rotator cuff. "I am complying, but I am stating for the record that this is an unlawful detention." Hensley kicked Darius's legs out from under him. The big man went down hard, his knees slamming into the wet, unforgiving concrete. Before Darius could catch his breath, Hensley drove a heavy knee directly into his spine, pressing his face into a puddle on the sidewalk. The freezing water filled Darius's mouth. Cold steel ratcheted tightly around his wrist, biting into the skin. "You have the right to remain silent, pal," Hensley whispered venomously into his ear. "I suggest you use it." They hauled him up by the handcuffs, nearly dislocating his shoulders, and threw him into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, enclosing him in the smell of old sweat and vinyl, Darius sat upright. He didn't yell, he didn't curse, he simply looked at the digital clock on the cruiser's dashboard and memorized the car number printed on the dash. Unit 412. Up front, Hensley laughed as he tossed Darius's duffel bag into the trunk. "Burglary tools," Hensley said to Callahan as they got back into the front seats. "I felt a crowbar in there." "I only had boxing gear, Officer Hensley." Darius spoke from the back, deliberately using the man's name. "And there is a dashboard camera in this vehicle, as well as the intersection camera at Harrison and 9th. Both will show a clear lack of probable cause. Hensley turned around, his eyes wide with a manic mix of amusement and rage. You think anyone gives a damn what you say? You're going to a cage, and tomorrow a public defender is going to plead you out to disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Enjoy the ride, counselor. Darius leaned back against the hard plastic seat. He let the silence stretch out, accompanied only by the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers. Let them dig the hole, he thought to himself. Let them dig it as deep as they possibly can. Precinct 8 was a relic of an earlier era, a brutalist concrete structure that felt more like a bunker than a public service building. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing hum, illuminating a lobby packed with the weary dregs of the night shift. Hensley and Callahan marched Darius through the double doors, frog-marching him past a row of holding benches. A few other officers looked up, nodded at Hensley, and went back to their paperwork. Nobody asked why a man in gym clothes was bleeding from a scrape on his cheek. Nobody questioned the excessive force. Systemic apathy hung in the air like thick smoke. They reached the booking desk manned by Sergeant Elias Crow, an older man with tired eyes and a drooping gray mustache. "What do we got, Hensley?" Crow asked, barely looking up from his computer monitor. "Prowler, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct," Hensley rattled off seamlessly, reciting the lie with practiced ease. "Refused to ID on the street." "Empty your pockets," Crow ordered. Callahan roughly unzipped Darius's hoodie and patted him down, pulling out a soaked leather wallet, a set of keys, and a cell phone. Callahan tossed them into a plastic gray bin on the counter. Hensley snatched the wallet and flipped it open, pulling out the driver's license. He didn't look at the credentials behind it. He didn't notice the metallic gold card tucked in the inner sleeve. He just read the front of the license. "Darius Harlan," Hensley read aloud, tossing the license back into the bin. "Well, Darius, you're spending the night in the honeymoon suite. Let's go." They didn't process his fingerprints right away. They didn't allow him his legally mandated phone call. The blatant violations were piling up so fast that Darius was categorizing them in his head like a grocery list. Violation of department policy, failure to process property correctly, denial of legal counsel. Hensley grabbed him by the elbow and shoved him down a narrow, heavily scuffed hallway. They reached holding cell C, a cramped iron cage that reeked of urine and industrial bleach. Hensley unlocked the cuffs, shoved Darius inside, and slammed the heavy iron bar shut. The metallic clang echoed down the corridor. "Breakfast is later," Hensley grinned, tapping his baton against the bars. "Sleep tight." Darius stood in the center of the cell. He didn't massage his bruised wrists. He walked over to the thin metal bench bolted to the cinder block wall and sat down. Across from him in the corner, a man was sleeping off a heavy bout of intoxication, snoring loudly. The night dragged on. For hours, Darius sat perfectly still in the dim light. He didn't sleep. He watched the officers walk past the cell block. He listened to their conversations. He listened to how they spoke to the inmates, to each other. He observed Sergeant Crow sleeping at the booking desk. He noted the times the patrol officers failed to do their mandatory welfare checks on the holding cells. The adrenaline of the arrest had faded, leaving a dull, throbbing pain in his shoulders and knees. But his mind was razor sharp. He had spent the last 2 decades building cases, dismantling corrupt organizations, and holding the powerful accountable. He knew how the machinery of the law worked from the street level all the way to the governor's mansion. He had seen bad cops before, but to experience it firsthand, to feel the sheer suffocating helplessness that ordinary citizens felt when stripped of their rights, it ignited a cold, focused fury deep within his chest. As the precinct began to stir, the night shift was exhausted and irritable. The morning shift was filtering in, carrying steaming cups of coffee and shaking off the rain, which had finally stopped. The heavy steel door at the end of the cell block swung open. Footsteps echoed rapidly down the hall, sharp, authoritative clicks of high heels on the linoleum, accompanied by the heavier, hesitant boots of Sergeant Crow. "I demand you open that cell immediately, Sergeant," a crisp, commanding female voice echoed. Hensley, who was lingering near the coffee machine at the end of the hall, stepped forward. Whoa, lady, you can't be back here. Who are you?" Amara Voss stopped in front of holding cell C. She was dressed in an impeccable charcoal pinstripe suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase. She was a high-powered attorney who charged $1,000 an hour, and her icy glare could freeze water. "I am this man's legal counsel," Amara said, turning her piercing gaze on Hensley. "And you are Officer Hensley, badge number 8492, is that correct?" Hensley narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, that's me. Your client is a violent prowler, counselor. He's not going anywhere until his arraignment." Amara didn't even blink. She turned to Sergeant Crow, holding up a piece of paper bearing a judge's official seal. "This is an emergency writ of habeas corpus signed by Superior Court Judge Quinn Ashford. The charges have been dropped entirely. Release my client immediately, or you will all be held in contempt of court." Crow looked at the paper, his face turning pale. He didn't argue. He fumbled with his keys, walked past a stunned Hensley, and unlocked the heavy iron door of cell C. Darius stood up slowly. He smoothed out the wrinkles in his damp hoodie and walked out of the cell. He didn't look angry. He looked completely, terrifyingly in control. "You think you're pretty smart getting a hotshot lawyer?" Hensley sneered, stepping in front of Darius to block his path. "You're just delaying the inevitable, Harlan. I know your face now. Next time I see you on my streets, it won't just be a night in a cell." Darius stopped. He looked down at the young officer, his dark eyes locking onto Hensley's. "No, Officer Hensley," Darius said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "Next time you see me, you will be the one needing a lawyer." Darius stepped around the cop and walked out into the lobby. Amara handed him a heavy plastic bag containing his personal effects. "Are you all right, Darius?" she asked softly as they walked through the double doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool morning air. "I'm fine, Amara," Darius said, pulling his cell phone from the bag and powering it on. "But this precinct is sick. It's rotten to the studs. Hensley is just a symptom." "The mayor's office has been calling," Amara noted, opening the door of a waiting black SUV. "They are panicking. The official swearing-in ceremony was supposed to be a press event." "Cancel the press event," Darius said, sliding into the leather seat of the SUV. There was a freshly pressed custom-tailored navy blue suit waiting for him on the back seat. "Call Commissioner Holloway. Tell him I'm skipping the ceremony and assuming my duties effective immediately." Darius looked out the tinted window, staring back at the gray concrete bunker of Precinct 8 as the SUV pulled away from the curb. "Tell the commissioner I'm coming to work," Darius said, dialing a number on his phone, "and tell him to bring a lot of handcuffs." The sun had finally broken through the lingering storm clouds, casting a bright, unforgiving light over the steel and glass facade of Central Police Headquarters. On the upper floor, Commissioner Grant Holloway paced nervously behind his massive mahogany desk. Holloway was a seasoned politician in a uniform, a man who survived by keeping scandals out of the headlines. Today, the headline had just walked into his office. The heavy oak doors swung open. Darius Harlan stepped inside. The damp, battered gray sweatshirt was gone. In its place was a flawlessly tailored charcoal navy Brioni suit, a crisp white shirt, and a crimson silk tie. The brutal scrapes on his wrist were hidden beneath immaculate French cuffs. Only the small dark bruise on his cheekbone hinted at the violence of the previous night. He carried himself with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a man who owned the room the second he entered it. "Terrence, Darius," Commissioner Holloway breathed, rushing forward with his hand extended. "My God, the mayor called me at dawn. I am profoundly, deeply sorry about what happened at the 8th Precinct. It is an absolute embarrassment to the badge." Darius did not take the offered hand. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locking onto the commissioner. Holloway slowly lowered his hand, clearing his throat awkwardly. "An embarrassment implies a mistake, Grant," Darius said, his deep voice smooth but carrying the lethal edge of a razor. "What happened last night was not a mistake. It was a well-rehearsed systemic operation of abuse. Those officers didn't hesitate. They didn't worry about cameras, protocol, or consequences. That tells me they have done it 100 times before. I assure you they will be suspended immediately pending a full review," Holloway stammered, retreating behind his desk. "They won't be suspended," Darius corrected him, walking over to the window and looking down at the sprawling city. "They will be indicted, and I am not waiting for a review board to tell me what I already know." Darius turned around, his gaze piercing. For years, Darius Harlan had been the most feared federal civil rights prosecutor on the East Coast. He had dismantled corrupt narcotics units in Chicago and indicted entire precinct commands in Philadelphia. The mayor had spent months begging him to return to Belmont to take over the deeply troubled Internal Affairs Bureau. Darius had finally agreed, demanding absolute autonomy. His official swearing in as the chief of Internal Affairs was supposed to be a polite televised ceremony. "The press conference is canceled," Darius stated. "I am assuming command of IAB right now. Where is my team?" A short while later, Darius stood at the head of a sprawling conference table in the IAB war room. Gathered around him were the 12 handpicked investigators of the Special Investigations Unit. At his immediate right was Captain Serena Langford, a fiercely intelligent former homicide detective with a reputation for being incorruptible. To his left was Lieutenant Nate Soren, an expert in forensic data auditing. "Good morning," Darius said, his voice commanding absolute silence. "As of this moment, I am your chief. We are not going to waste time with introductions. We have an active, escalating crisis at the 8th Precinct." He pressed a button on a remote and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. It displayed the dash cam footage from Unit 412 synchronized with the intersection traffic cameras from Harrison Boulevard. "Last night, this man was unlawfully detained, assaulted, and falsely arrested by Officer Blake Hensley and Officer Reed Callahan," Darius explained. Soren squinted at the screen. "Chief, respectfully, that's you." "Yes, it is, Lieutenant," Darius replied coldly, which means we have absolute, unassailable first-hand witness testimony to pair with the digital forensics. Watch the screen. The room watched in heavy silence as the footage played. They saw Darius walking calmly. They saw Hensley initiate the stop without reasonable suspicion. They heard the audio clear as day as Hensley mocked him, shoved him, and drove a knee into his spine while Darius offered zero physical resistance. Captain Langford's jaw tightened. Textbook excessive force. No probable cause. They didn't even run your name through the database before they put hands on you. It gets worse, Darius said, fast-forwarding the timeline to the precinct lobby cameras. Observe the booking process. Sergeant Elias Crow is the desk officer. Notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't log your personal effects into the secure digital ledger, Soren noted, furiously typing on his laptop. He doesn't initiate a medical evaluation despite the visible facial laceration. And wow, they completely bypassed the fingerprinting station. They just threw you in a cage because they were lazy and because they believed they were untouchable, Darius said, leaning over the table. They thought I was just a ghost in the system, nobody they could break to meet a quota or feed their egos. Darius pulled a stack of heavily redacted files from his briefcase and tossed them onto the center of the table. I spent the hours observing the cell block, Darius continued. I noted severe dereliction of duty across the board, missed welfare checks, falsified logbooks. I want a full audit of Precinct 8's arrest records for an extended period. Cross-reference every arrest made by Hensley and Callahan where the sole charges were resisting arrest and disorderly conduct with no underlying felony. I guarantee you will find a mountain of false arrests just like mine. Captain Langford looked up, a fierce predatory smile forming on her lips. We are going to gut that precinct, Chief. We are going to perform surgery, Darius corrected, his eyes locking onto the frozen image of Hensley's arrogant face on the screen. Surgical, precise, and devastating. Here is the operational directive. Darius turned to the whiteboard and wrote out the immediate charges with rapid, aggressive strokes of a dry erase marker. Warrants to be executed. Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. State Penal Code 188, Perjury, Filing a False Police Report. State Penal Code 245, Aggravated Assault by a Peace Officer. State Penal Code 236, False Imprisonment. Langford, get the district attorney to sign off on these warrants immediately, Darius ordered. Soren, gear up. We are going for a ride. The atmosphere inside the 8th precinct was thick with the usual morning chaos. Telephones rang incessantly. Civilians argued at the front desk, and officers milled about the bullpen, swapping stories and clutching cheap foam cups of coffee. Officer Blake Hensley sat at his desk, his boots kicked up on a stack of incident reports. He was bragging to a rookie cop about how he had handled a street brawler the night before. Across from him, Officer Callahan was slowly typing out the fabricated arrest narrative for Darius Harland, struggling to make the timeline sound plausible. Just say he took a fighting stance, Reed, Hensley laughed, tossing a crumpled piece of paper at his partner. It ain't rocket science. Public defender is going to plead it down by noon anyway. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the bullpen swung open. Captain Theo Rains, the commanding officer of Precinct 8, stepped out of his office. Rains looked physically ill. His face was ashen and he was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Hensley, Callahan, Rains called out, his voice cracking slightly. My office, right now. Hensley smirked, swinging his legs off the desk. Probably want to give us a commendation for getting a prowler off the street. Reed, come on. The two officers swaggered across the bullpen, oblivious to the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen over the older, more experienced sergeants in the room. They stepped into Captain Rains's office, Hensley leading the way with a cocky grin. What's up, Cap? Hensley asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. The door slammed shut behind them. Captain Serena Langford stood there, her badge prominent on her belt, her hand resting near her sidearm. Lieutenant Nate Soren stepped out from the corner of the room, holding a thick manila folder. Hensley's grin faltered. Whoa, IAB, what's going on here, Captain? Captain Rains didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, looking like a man attending a funeral. The high-backed leather chair behind the captain's desk slowly swiveled around. Darius Harland sat there. He was perfectly framed by the morning light streaming through the blinds. He looked immaculate in his navy suit, his hands folded neatly on the desk. He looked at Hensley with a cold, terrifying serenity. Hensley physically recoiled. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Callahan let out a strangled, breathless gasp, taking a panicked step backward until his shoulder hit the heavy oak door. Good morning, Officer Hensley, Darius said, his voice echoing in the small office like the tolling of a bell. Officer Callahan. You... Hensley stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, trying to reconcile the heavily bruised man in the wet hoodie with the impeccably dressed Titan sitting behind his captain's desk. You were the guy? I am Darius Harlan, Darius said slowly, standing up to his full imposing height, Chief of the Internal Affairs Bureau. And as I recall, you promised me that the next time I saw you on your streets, it wouldn't just be a night in a cell. Darius pressed a button on a small digital recorder on the desk. Hensley's own venomous, sneering voice filled the silent room. You think you're pretty smart getting a hotshot lawyer? You're just delaying the inevitable, Harlan. I know your face now. Next time I see you on my streets, it won't just be a night in a cell. Darius clicked the recorder off. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. You were right, Blake, Darius said softly. It won't be just a night, it will be years. Chief, listen. We thought you were someone else, Callahan pleaded, his voice high-pitched and trembling. It was dark. It was raining. You fit the description. Do not insult my intelligence, Reed. Darius's voice cracked like a whip, the sudden volume making both officers flinch violently. You didn't have a description. You had an ego. You saw a man walking quietly in the rain and you decided to break the law to prove you were the law. Darius walked around the desk, stopping mere inches from Hensley. The young cop was trembling, his previous bravado shattered into a million pieces of sheer panic. You thought you were throwing a helpless man into a concrete cage, Darius whispered, leaning in so only Hensley could hear. But all you did was lock yourselves in. Darius stepped back and nodded to Captain Langford. Blake Hensley. Reed Callahan, Langford said, stepping forward with her handcuffs drawn. You are under arrest for aggravated assault, filing a false police report, and deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting around Hensley's wrist sounded exactly like the cuffs he had slapped on Darius earlier, but this time it was the sound of justice snapping shut. Soren secured Callahan, who was openly weeping. Strip them of their badges, their weapons, and their union cards, Darius ordered, not taking his eyes off Hensley, and walk them out through the front doors. I want every single officer in this bullpen to see exactly what happens to those who desecrate the shield. As Langford and Soren marched the disgraced, handcuffed officers out of the office and into the shocked silence of the precinct bullpen, Darius turned to Captain Rains. Sergeant Crow is suspended without pay as of this second, Darius commanded. I have IAB auditors moving into this precinct shortly. Every arrest, every report, every piece of evidence logged in this building for an extended period is going under a microscope. If you have any rot in your house, Captain, I will find it and I will burn it out. Darius didn't wait for an answer. He walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing with absolute authority. He walked straight through the bullpen, parting the sea of stunned police officers. He pushed open the heavy front doors of the 8th precinct and stepped out into the bright, clear morning. The rain was gone, the storm was over, but for the corrupt cops of Belmont, the real hurricane had just made landfall. Did the look on Hensley's face when the chair swiveled around make your jaw drop? If you felt the incredible rush of justice when Darius turned the tables on those corrupt bullies, smash that like button. Share this incredible story of a brilliant mastermind taking down the system from the inside. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more thrilling real-life justice stories. Drop a comment below. What was the most satisfying moment of Darius's revenge for you?